Greetings, Captains. Welcome to another exciting episode of Game Fact Files. In today's video, we are going to embark on a fascinating journey into another principle of One Piece TCG. Our destination, the concept of tempo. This concept can shape the outcome of your games and turn a losing situation into a victorious one. Before we dive into the video, I'd like to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps support the channel. Now let's get into it. In this video, we'll start by delving into the concept of tempo. Then, we'll explore tempo cards and leaders, followed by a discussion of various tempo strategies. Lastly, we'll break down the topic of card advantage. Tempo is a term to describe the pace at which a player plays threats. It is about carefully looking at when and how you play characters, and using Dawn efficiently, instead of just rushing into aggressive strategies without a plan. In the most basic form, tempo means board presence. It depends on how your characters, Dawn, stages, and events match up against those of your opponent, and the subsequent consequences. The word tempo is used because of the way two players are dictating the pace of the game. The term has its roots in musical notation, where it means of how fast or slow a music is played, and it's often described as beats per minute. It was later adopted in the context of chess, using the cyclic nature of turns to determine which player is compelled to reach to their opponent's moves. One Piece employs the concept similarly, thanks to its turn structure, but it's more dynamic due to the potential of multiple actions within a single turn. When discussing tempo in relation to a player's deck, it's often simplified to speed, which refers to the absolute fastest pace a deck can maintain. However, the fastest tempo might not always be the most optimal strategy for a given match. For example, playing all low-cost characters as quickly as possible might be considered fast, but it can sometimes lead to defeat when facing consistently higher impact plays from your opponent. A rough example of this is that you wouldn't waste 2 Magra or Makino to give 6,000 to a character that is probably going to deal damage anyway. In some cases, you might also keep a searcher on hand to keep your option open and get the card you need on the right time. To better understand the concept of tempo, consider a hypothetical mirror match scenario where both players have no cards in hand, and play a character with the maximum amount of Dawn they have each turn. If each character they cast kills the opponent's character each turn, the game's tempo remains the same. Any deviation from this ideal scenario disrupts the tempo. For example, if a player misses a play, that player falls behind in terms of tempo. Conversely, casting 2 cards in a turn can significantly boost your tempo. For example, if your opponent on his second turn has spent 4 Dawn for a character like Usopp, and on your turn you kill him with a card that only costs 2 Dawn like the Green Diable, while also play a 3 Dawn character, you are getting a tempo advantage since you are not only dealing with opponent's threat, but also deploying a new character on the board that he has to answer it. When it comes to card advantage, you may occasionally face the dilemma of choosing between gaining a tempo advantage at the cost of card advantage, or vice versa. For example, if you take a turn to cast Sanji's Pilaf, you gain card advantage, but you've sacrificed a turn without strengthening your board presence, potentially giving up tempo in the process. In addition to tempo, there are 3 other key aspects of virtual card advantage that we'll be covering in an upcoming video. These include card selection, recurring effects, and strategies that diminish the value of your opponent's cards. When Eric Taylor originally pitched this concept, it was defined as card advantage when no one loses cards. An example of this is playing an 8 Dawn kid against an opponent's full board of characters. Although the cards are not being technically removed from play through a sweeper effect, the opponent no longer gains an advantage from the cards they have played because they cannot perform their function as intended. Tempo is a non-intuitive way to gain card advantage, gained when a player uses cards faster than their opponent. If a player loses the game with cards in their hand, those cards are lost, similar to losing them through other more conventional forms of card advantage like a discard effect. Therefore, if one spends their cards winning the game before the opponent can spend their own, they have gained virtual card advantage in the process. Tempo is often used in conjunction with Dawn efficiency. Aggro decks aim to maximize their own tempo by playing efficiently in the early turns to outpace slower decks. When playing an aggressive deck, Another example of gaining tempo is after attacking your opponent and being attacked on swingback. Aggressively discard your hand to save your characters. You will lose the card advantage, but on your turn you might have 4 or even 5 characters on board and your opponent will probably not have time to recover. Some control decks, on the other hand, primarily focus on surviving long enough for card advantage to become more critical, with less emphasis on tempo. Surviving with cards like Queen until you wipe the board with a Kaido is determining the tempo of the game. While tempo isn't tied to a specific color, some leaders have best tempo than others. And while we will not analyze all 40 leaders we currently have in game, I will stick to some of the top leaders that win local and online tournaments. Starting with Purple Doffy, saving 2 Dawn each turn is a huge boost of tempo. Besides that, playing 7 Dawn Luffy along with 2 other film characters in the same turn is giving you one of the best board control advantage in the game. Film mechanic applies to Kid as well, that his ability is a great tempo advantage too. Spending 1 card to remove 2 threats of your opponent is intimidating. A lot of times, even hitting for less than 12,000, the opponent will just lose the character instead of investing 2 or 3 cards when your Dawn is active. Blue Crocodile's ability gives you tempo as well. Combined with a sequence of bounce cards like Soj King, 7 Dawn Doffy or Mihawk can disrupt your opponent by playing threats. Whitebeard is gaining advantage exchanging his card draws from his own life for tempo. Even after the restriction of Radical Beam and 4 Dawn Marco to 1 copy, he is still performing very well in every tour. Katakuri is gaining tempo from triggers coming into play for free, and while the deck had a mediocre performance before OP04, on Kingdoms of Intrigue release, he got 2 of the most powerful triggers in the game, Sanji and Bij. Making a character or leader unable to attack is one of the reasons you don't see a lot of kids in tours on this meta. I won't say something about Sanji. You have probably seen one of them trigger on your opponent's last life when you're going for lethal. The last leader I want to talk about is Trafalgar Law. Law is having a fair match versus almost every deck in the game and can practically win everything, but he has a big disadvantage if you haven't practiced the deck a lot: yourself. The game plan is heavily reliant on drawing not only consistently, but also in the right order. You will always need to find a blocker Law or a Bonnie, and you will always need to find a lot of 1 Dawn characters so you can reach Shambles. The deck tends to suffer if behind on board, but if you have good draws and let's say avoid a couple of Fire Fists, the tempo boost you're getting from leader is the most insane thing in the game. You spend 2 Dawn to return a character and play a 5 Dawn Law that will return something too, and put in game 3 more Dawn. So without analyzing all possibilities about returning Searchers, or 2,000 counters, or Brook that gives Dawns, and all other possible on-play abilities, you practically exchange 2 Dawn for 8. That's all for today, Captains. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it as exciting as exploring the Grand Line. Don't forget to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you next week with more exciting content.